I'm Jonathan Collins, Associate Director here for the Center of Educational Equity. I'm also an Assistant Professor of Political Science here at Teachers College, and also an Assistant Professor of Political Science by courtesy at the Columbia University Political Science Department. I'll begin by providing just an overview of school funding and the inequities and inadequacies, that led to a major lawsuit against the state of New York, which led to the development of the current funding formula called Foundation Aid. Next, my colleague Nan Mead will talk about the efforts to seek funding to develop a new school funding formula. Then following Nan, my colleague Michael Rebell will discuss why we need a new formula. Our discussion will continue with Jesse Levin and Bruce Baker from the American Institutes for Research, our partners in this project. So it's important to understand that that funding, of course, is incredibly important to operate public schools, and this funding comes largely from the state budget and from the funds raised by local school districts. State school aid helps to offset disparities in what school districts can raise. So for many low wealth districts, the bulk of their school funding, it doesn't come from their local property taxes. It actually comes from the state. And so 30 years ago, a number of parents and community boards in New York City initiated a major lawsuit against the state because the governor and the legislature were not providing enough funding to meet the students' needs, including the needs of children in poverty, students learning English as a new language, and students with disabilities. This case was known as the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, or CFE, versus the state of New York. The lawyer for the CFE plaintiffs was our very own Professor Michael Rebell, the Executive Director of the Center for Educational Equity here, who will speak with you in a few minutes. So after a long trial, many appeals, the courts in the CFE case decided three things. One, students throughout the state of New York have a right under the state constitution to, quote, the opportunity for a sound basic education, end quote. Two, in order to comply with this constitutional right, the state must ensure sufficient funding in at least the following areas which the state had not at that time meeting students' needs. Those areas are sufficient numbers of qualified teachers, principals, and other personnel, appropriate class sizes, adequate and accessible school buildings with sufficient space to ensure appropriate class size and implementation of a sound curriculum, sufficient and up-to-date books, supplies, libraries, educational technology and laboratories, suitable curricula, including an expanded platform of programs to help at-risk students by giving them more, quote, time on task, end quote. Adequate resources for students with extraordinary needs, and then a safe and orderly environment. And then the third point that was established was that the state could no longer use backroom political wheeling and dealing, which is how it was done prior to the CFE case, in order to determine how much money to send to each school district. Instead, the Constitution requires them to, one, do a systematic analysis of how much money is required based on students' needs to provide all students the opportunity for a basic sound education. Two, create a fair, equitable method for distributing state funds that will ensure that every school has sufficient funds to meet its students' needs. And three, implement an accountability system to ensure the reforms actually provide all students the opportunity for a sound and basic education. So as you can see from this timeline, in response to the CFE decision, the state created the Foundation Aid formula in 2007 to ensure sufficient funding was allocated to NYC and the other high needs districts. Now, at the time, the attorneys, advocates, and parents were satisfied with the formula, that the formula did include the amount of funding that was needed to provide all students in the state the opportunity for a sound basic education. But the school funding increases demanded by the CFE hit a major snag. Here's what happened. So the legislature did appropriate amounts, the amounts called for by the formula for the first 2 years. But after the 2008 recession, they cut back on their commitment. It wasn't until 2023 that the state finally increased funding to the amount owed under the old foundation aid formula. But the foundational aid formula is now 17 years old. It is sorely out of date, and it is no longer meeting students' needs. That's why we and many others have called for the state to develop a new school funding formula that meets students' needs for 2024, not just for 2007. Now, I'll introduce my colleague, Nan Mead, the Director of Outreach and Communications at the Center for Educational Equity, a longtime education advocate. Nan previously served on New York City's Chancellor's Parent Advisory Council and the Community Education Council in District 3. From 2016 to 2022, she was a member of the New York State Board of Regents and chair of the State Aid Subcommittee. Now I'll pass it on to Nan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to spend a few minutes discussing advocacy efforts to secure additional funding to study and replace the foundation aid formula. As Jonathan mentioned, I served for 6 years on the New York State Board of Regents, which is the body that sets the policies and procedures for education in New York. By law, the regents are responsible for developing the education budget request for aid to schools and districts each year. And so the regents, in consultation with stakeholders, solidify the budget request and deliver it to the governor and to the legislature each December, right before the start of the legislative session. So during the financial crisis, there was a drop in education funding. And while you can see on this timeline here, and while there were subsequent incremental increases in the years that followed, the feedback from schools and districts was that the formula was not working as intended, due in part to changing student needs. The regents first requested an appropriation for the state education department to hire experts to develop a new formula beginning in 2019. But as one can imagine, there are many competing interests in the legislature for funding, and there certainly were during that particular time. Then the following year, of course, we experienced the pandemic beginning in 2020, and a lot of the focus was on the closing of schools and securing federal rescue funds. Although the state eventually provided the additional education funding by fully funding foundation aid, many school districts experienced unanticipated challenges with the current school funding system. And so in 2022, when I first joined the Center for Educational Equity, my very first assignment actually was to help get the word out that we were calling for the state to appoint a standing independent commission that would develop a constitutional new school formula as well as oversee its implementation. The state education department, in the meantime, also continued to press the legislature for funding for a study as well. And although the legislature did come around and initially endorsed State Ed's request for an appropriation in both 2023 and in 2024, the governor rejected these requests in both of those years. Instead, in 2024, the governor authorized the Rockefeller Institute, which is a research center that is part of the state university system, SUNY, to tweak the formula. And so to give us a little more detail on why we need a new school formula, I'm going to now transition over to my colleague, Michael Rebell, who is the founder and executive director of the Center for Educational Equity and professor of education law and educational practice at Teachers College. Michael?
Okay, thanks very much, Nan. Let's see, can people hear me? I don't.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I don't know. I don't see my picture on the screen, but I hope everyone else does. In any event, as Jonathan and Nan indicated, I was the attorney who fought that CFE case. It took us 17 years to get the amounts that were called for fully funded. And in the beginning, it was a very equitable and adequate formula. But over 17 years, a lot has happened. There have been a lot of changes in the state, and these included demographic shifts, enrollment changes. All these things were not being taken into account by that 17-year-old formula. It was written in 2007, and it was in a concrete fashion, you might say, stuck back 17 years ago. So that meant when poverty rates have grown enormously in many districts, we're still using a 2000 census as a part of the basis for counting the number of kids who are entitled to extra funding because of their needs, the special needs, as the court had ordered for an extra platform of services for kids with those needs. The formula has not kept up with the needs of ELL children, of students with disabilities, and we have new initiatives like universal pre-K, which is not quite universal in the state, but it's expanded, but the system for funding it is uneven, unfair, and inadequate. We have increased numbers of students in temporary housing. When the formula was written, there were very small numbers of students temporary housing. Now we have 10 or 11% in that category in New York City and other places around the state. Back in 2007, nobody ever heard of migrant students being a factor in student funding. Now it is a major factor in many districts. And of course, we've all been through the pandemic, and we had pandemic learning loss, which is very much still with us, increased demand for mental health services. None of this is covered by that formula. That's why, as Nan spelled it out, the regents, the legislature, education advocacy groups throughout the state called for the state to develop a new formula. And the Constitution, Article 11, as articulated in the CFE case, does say that you've got to meet current student needs, not needs from 17 years ago. Now, the governor did convince the legislature to provide an appropriation to the Rockefeller Institute. As many of you know, they've been holding hearings over the summer. And look, we applaud the efforts of the Rockefeller or anyone else to study the inadequacies of the current formula. But let's be very clear, the Rockefeller Institute's mandate is very limited and very inadequate. They were told that they should look at the present formula and come up with some proposals for how you could improve that formula. We take that to mean tweaking the formula. And by the way, the authorization to Rockefeller said that they have to be sure to come up with proposals that can be sustained by the current state's financial situation. The Constitution, we're not talking about wasting money and all, but it says student needs. That's what has to be provided. And whatever the cost is, the kids have a constitutional right for it. So there are all these limitations on Rockefeller's authorization. And bottom line, they were not authorized to propose and develop a new formula. That's what we need. We don't need to just patch up a few of the blaring inadequacies in the current formula. We need to have a total reconsideration of what the needs throughout our state are in 2024, 25, 26, not tweak and band-aid what was written in 2007. So that's why we've put together this new, what we call ACE school funding project with the help of AIR. We see two phases for this. The current phase that we're working on, we're aiming toward the budget development program in the legislature that'll be going on this spring. And in anticipation for that, our colleagues from AIR, who have great expertise on a national level in this area, are undertaking currently, they've already gotten to work on this, what's called a cost function analysis of what the current needs are in New York State. They're gathering an enormous amount of statistical data and are going to be doing a very detailed analytic project to determine what is fair, unfair under the current circumstance, what the new demographics are, what the new poverty rates are, what the current regional costs are, just all kinds of factors, what the needs of students with disabilities are. And they're going to do a very thorough analysis. In the meantime, the Rockefeller Institute is going to come up with their proposals. We respect what they're doing. We hope they're going to come up with some proposals for improving the current formula. And when they come out with their report, we're going to analyze it. We're going to use the data we're getting from AIR to understand the significance of what they're proposing. If they're not proposing enough changes that can be enacted right away to improve the current formula, we'll come up with a proposal of our own, backed up by the new data we're getting. And the governor is going to come up with her proposal in January for next year's budget. And we're going to talk about those proposals and try to influence it in a very positive direction. Now, what all this is saying is we're going to work with Rockefeller, with the governor, with the legislature, and we hope with a lot of support from those of you who will join with us in this effort. We want to make the formula for next year as good as possible, but it's not going to be the complete new formula that we all know is required to fully take into account on a comprehensive basis the needs post-pandemic for all kids in the state of New York. So that's what we call phase two. We can't do phase two and develop the full formula by next spring when the 25 budget is going to come out. But we think it can be done for the year after. And that's what we call phase two. And phase two is going to be adding qualitative input to the mostly quantitative analysis based on an enormous amount of statistical data that AIR is currently working with. We've got to add a lot of human dimensions to that. And that requires professional judgment, public engagement, input from a broad range of people, students, parents, teachers, interested public around the state. There's got to be a process to gather all that information in a transparent way. We hope that after phase one, if the current formula is improved a bit, if we can all work together, that the governor will agree to move ahead, working with the legislature, working with SED to develop that new formula. It is the state's responsibility. It's not our responsibility. If they're willing to pick it up for phase two and do the job before the 26 budget process, we will work with them. We'll turn over all the information we have from AIR, so long as it's going to be an open, transparent process that's going to allow the public input that we're talking about. But we'd be happy to have SED take it over, the legislature, the governor, however they want to set it up, if it's a fair process that's really going to take into account student needs. On the other hand, if the governor continues to insist that all she wants to do is continue tweaking small changes in the current formula, that is not satisfactory. And we've raised enough money with great support from the Robin Hood Foundation and the Schott Foundation. They're committed for phase one. If we have to, we'll raise additional money for a phase two. And we'd ask AIR to help work with us to develop that whole new formula. But we'd rather not do the job. We'd rather have the state do it. We'll see how that plays out. Anyhow, that's our overall plan. We had originally asked for a totally independent commission to do this. I can go into detail in the Q&A why we proposed that. We were convinced that if SED got the money, we think that they would do a proper job that would really look at it from the point of view of student needs, not just political wheeling and dealing. That's our aim. If it can be done through SED, with the legislature, with the governor, that is the best way. But if necessary, we're committed to raising money for phase two, working with AIR, and seeing this project to the end. Okay, at this point, I'd like to introduce two of our colleagues from AIR, the American Institutes for Research. They actually have a team of about 6 people at AIR that are working on this, but two of the leaders of those teams Jesse Levin and Bruce Baker are with us at this time. So I'm going to turn it over to Jesse and Bruce to introduce themselves, tell us a little about them, about their organization, and what they're contributing to this project.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. I'm going to share my screen with a little presentation here. That's all right. Can somebody let me know if you can see the slideshow?
Yes.
Looking good,
Great.
Jesse.
Okay, great. So thanks so much, Michael. My name is Jesse Levin. I'm a principal research economist at American Institutes for Research. And we're going to tell you, just give you an overview of what of the study that we're doing. First, I wanted to just let you know who AIR is, the organization that you're dealing with. So we're a not-for-profit social science research institution. We've been around for a while. We were established in 1946, and I think most importantly for this for this group to understand what our mission is. So I'm just going to read it for you. And our mission is to generate and use rigorous evidence that contributes to a better, more equitable world. And I've been at AIR for just about 22 years. One of the first projects I was on was serving as the deputy director of the original New York Adequacy study. So this is very important for me to follow up and come back 20 years later and to do it again. Study team leadership. I've told you a little bit about myself. I'm an economist. I focus on education finance, and I'll be talking a little bit about some of the work we've done in other states. Give you a quick overview of that. And I'm here with Bruce Baker. Bruce and I have worked together for a long time. Bruce is actually at the University of Miami. But he's a regular consultant on virtually all of these studies that I do. Bruce, do you want to say a few things about yourself?
Yeah, I've been working with Jesse and the AIR team for a number of years on most of the states that we're going to be talking about here. I've also done work. I was working on behalf of a related lawsuit brought by upstate small cities against the. Can you hear me? I heard some background. Okay, yeah, I also have done work over the years on the state of New York, including work for the upstate small cities who are simultaneously more or less during a later period, challenging many of the same issues and problems with the state school funding formula. So I think both of us bring some significant experience to bear, having worked on New York State issues and the foundation formula and its problems and its lack of adaptation over time that Michael spoke to a few minutes ago. From there, I'll hand it back to Jesse to walk us through the next.
Sure. Thanks so much, Bruce. So let's see if I can get this to cycle. Very quick history of the school finance adequacy studies that I've led. With Bruce on many of these. I put these in reverse chronological order. So currently, in addition to working on New York, we've got studies going on in Oregon, Colorado, Ohio, and California. Studies that are slightly less recent within the last 5 years are Delaware, Texas, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And then older studies, those that we've done more than 5 years ago, we've done 2 in California, 1 in New Mexico, and that one in New York, which was the CFE. Well, it was on the tail end of the CFE case. So I'm going to turn it back to Bruce. He's going to give you a nice overview. I know we're jumping back and forth here, but give you a nice overview of the methodology that we're using to investigate adequacy and equity of New York funding.
So I'll let you jump into the next slide. We've been again working together for a number of years, and methodologies have evolved on how we can best evaluate state school funding systems with the purpose of making those systems, help all kids, regardless of their own backgrounds and where they happen to attend school in a state, give all kids equal opportunity to achieve some common outcome goals. 2 general approaches to doing the cost analyses are to either look at the inputs, starting from the bottom here, look at the inputs, all the people, space, stuff, and time that goes into schooling for children from different backgrounds and in different settings to achieve common outcome goals. That would actually be how that remedy phase CFE study was done by Jesse and colleagues back in the mid 2000s. and a number of other studies at the time. We've also done studies that include both of these approaches. The approach that we've leaned more heavily on is kind of a large data approach of looking at the statistical linkages between spending, population served, outcomes achieved, and a variety of student characteristics and district characteristics of the districts where students are being educated in this outcome-oriented approach, which is very explicitly statistically linking, what are the outcome goals we want to achieve? What is the existing variation in outcomes across the different types of students in the state, in the different settings in which they are served? And as Michael noted a little while ago, one of the things that's happened is that the outcome goals have changed. The bar has changed that we want kids to meet in New York State over time. The demographics of the population have changed. There are certain changes to the settings and ways in which kids learn across those settings. And these are the kind of things that can be captured with just years and years of data across all 670 some districts and 4,750 or so schools in the state, with multiple years of data that allow us to do this kind of modeling to come up with projections of who needs how much, where, and under what circumstances to achieve the goals we want to achieve. Roll it forward, Jesse, which is more or less what I was just talking about. We construct what we call kind of a large data model on all the schools and districts in the state over multiple years. And we statistically model the relationships between the existing spending levels, the outcomes achieved, various different student population characteristics, in which we'll try alternative measures of children's kind of family economic status, economic disadvantage, background measures using different poverty thresholds, free or reduced lunch thresholds, but also potentially including data on homelessness, foster care, migrant populations, to see how those relate to the outcomes and the costs of mitigating the outcome variations. We'll look at different kind of structural characteristics and geographic location characteristics of districts, small, remote, rural districts that might be in kind of far upstate and western tier New York, and the differences in geographic costs of funding the teacher labor force, being able to recruit and retain teachers of comparable qualifications across districts and settings. So we build out a model with a whole bunch of data on all the schools and all the districts, and that model becomes a very useful tool for projecting how much spending is needed from one location to another, from one child to the next, across those locations to achieve the desired outcome goals. That becomes a model that can be used to guide a new version of a foundation aid formula, where the goal of the formula is to provide all kids equal opportunity to achieve a common set of outcome goals. That's what we're shooting for here. And this big process, these steps in this process, get us to cost target goals that can inform the reform of a state school finance formula. We take it in steps. We walk through this needs analysis. What are the best measures of student population characteristics that capture the likelihood of variation in outcomes, the measures of risk or need that we might want to leverage additional resources toward mitigating. Equity analysis, we also do an analysis of the kind of the what is. How is the funding currently distributed with respect to needs and costs? Which then gives us a benchmark against which to compare what we find in the next steps of, well, how should it be? If the funding were allocated with respect to cost and needs, what would it look like? We can compare the what is to the what should be to figure out what are the steps in moving forward to, from a formula that may not be sufficiently providing resources generally, and certainly appears to not be providing sufficient additional resources where the needs and costs are greater. How far off is that from the target, and how do we get from the what is to the what should be? Part of that is also figuring out the revenue side and how to kind of split the state and local responsibilities in funding sufficiently the needs and costs across the districts and children, again, with the goal of providing equal educational opportunity for all kids to achieve common outcome goals. I think that might bring us back to you, Jesse, or actually just a list of references, as is academically obligatory in such cases.
Thank you, Jesse and Bruce. for such an enlightening presentation on what to expect from the analysis and going into depth. We're really excited about that. If we could welcome the panelists back so that we can get things going for the Q&A session. Again, thank you all for being with us. We have quite the attendance for this event. And it shows the amount of enthusiasm and excitement that you all have for the next phase and for what we're planning with ACE. And let's get to some of your questions. Oh, these are some good ones. So one question is, what is your relationship with the Rockefeller Institute? Is the ACE project an add-on to inform the Rockefeller Institute study, or is it an alternative formula on its own?
It's very much, yeah, it's very much an alternative formula because, as I said earlier, look, we respect the fact that the folks at Rockefeller are going to be trying to improve the current formula. And we've had some good conversations with them. We've all agreed to cooperate. It's in everybody's interest to do as much as we can to improve the current formula for next year, because we all know it's going to take a full 2 years to really do the complete job that we're looking for. So we hope we'll continue a cooperative relationship with them. But our problem with the way Rockefeller is approaching it, and it's the limits of their legal authorization, is that they're looking at a number of specific questions. You know, should there be a better poverty count? Should there be a better regional cost distribution? Those are important questions. They're going to come up with answers on it. But a lot of the bigger questions, post-pandemic learning loss, how are we going to fund universal pre-K? How are we going to deal with the mental health issues for the kids around the state? What should be the weighting for all the different categories that need extra resources to provide equal opportunities? There's a limit to how much they can go into all of that. As I say, we're going to be cooperative where we can. Where we think they come up with good answers, like what methods we should use that are more up to date than the 2000 census for calculating poverty, for weighting extra costs of students with disabilities, we'll work with them on it. On the other hand, we are going to look very closely at what they come up with and ultimately what the governor proposes for next spring. And we're going to rely on a lot of this good data we're getting from the AIR folks. And we'll share that data with Rockefeller and with the public to the extent it's relevant on the particular issues they come up with. And we hope that we'll continue to have an active dialogue with them to come up with the best proposals possible for improving next year's formula. But again, let me emphasize, next year's formula is not going to solve the problem. And I'll say one other thing, it's very interesting to me. Rockefeller ran a series of hearings around the state this summer. Many of you may be aware of that. It was great that they did that, although many people told me the summer was not the best time for getting turnout from parents and teachers and people throughout the state. But nevertheless, I attended one of those. I listened to some of the others. It interested me that the range of issues that people were talking about, the range of problems, the range of needs that weren't being addressed were enormous, well beyond what Rockefeller's authorized to deal with. That's the kind of information and input we want to capture in going on to phase 2 and building the full formula.
Thank you, Michael. Here's another question. It's a bit of a question that prompts speculation. And so, you know, feel free to speculate on what you think is going on here. The question is, why did the governor block the state education department's request for funding to develop a new formula?
Well, look, I guess only the governor can answer that. And you're right, this is quite speculative. But the governor did make clear in her budget proposals, by the way, before I criticize something the governor's done, I want to give Governor Hochul a lot of credit. because we didn't have time to go into that whole timeline. But, for a good 14 or 15 years, we were battling her predecessors to get full funding for CFE, which should have come in 2011, 2012. And it was blocked. It was fought by Governor Cuomo and others. When Governor Hochul came into office a couple of years ago, one of the first things she did is reach out to us. We had another lawsuit pending to try to force the state to fully fund the current foundation aid formula. And she said, we don't need a lawsuit. We're going to do it. She settled the lawsuit with us. She said, give me 3 years. We'll pay out the $4.5 billion that's remaining to fully fund CFE. And she did that. So Governor Hochul was our hero, has been our hero. And it was very disappointing to me, though, that after she made sure that the CFE, the old foundation aid formula, was fully paid out in 2023, when we started talking about 2024, where we are now, and we were saying, Governor, you need to set up an independent commission to develop this new formula, we didn't get much of a response. And then when the legislature agreed we needed a new formula and wanted to give money to SED to start developing the new formula, she resisted that. And that's why we've got a difference with the governor now. I'm still hopeful that we can work together and Governor Hochul can be our hero again. At the moment, she's not. And what she did for 2024, this year, the year that is the year following the full payout of the old amount, she actually wanted to not only keep the old formula in effect, she made some proposals for cutting back the inflation factor and other aspects of it. And basically, I think what she was saying is that school funding has gotten very expensive. She emphasized that New York is the highest spending state in the country per capita when it comes to education. I think that may be the fact. Of course, we've got a lot of students with poverty backgrounds, a lot of students with disabilities. We have a lot of special needs. And our Constitution says the state has to support those. So I don't apologize for the fact that we're high spending. We should be. We're a relatively affluent state. But we need to do what's right for the kids. So I think Governor Hochul is showing some resistance now because of her budgetary pressures. We'd like to work with her on that. I've made clear to people on our staff that in developing this formula, if there are ways to save money, eliminate waste, more cost-efficient ways of providing services, we're all for that. But the bottom line is we have to meet the student needs. That's what the Constitution requires. And we hope that by next year, especially with all the evidence and additional information we're going to get from this AIR study, we'll be able to convince the governor to work with us and set up a process to get the full thing done by 2026.
Well, that creates a perfect transition. So I want to go to a couple of questions that have been posed for the AIR team. So Jesse, Bruce, whichever the two of you would want to take on these questions. Here you go. Question one: what data are AIR working with now? And then a second question: is AIR going to use the quote unquote successful schools methodology that the current formula is based on?
Okay, I can take that one. No, we are not going to use successful schools methodology because basically what that is taking the average spending of a handful of schools or districts that meet a certain standard without accounting for all the differences in needs and costs associated with meeting the same standard in different settings with different kids. And typically what happens when you use that approach is you'll get that average figure, and then they actually back out needs to get this artificially lowered figure. But then the additional weights put on it to address needs and costs they aren't based on any empirical analysis of the actual additional spending needed to achieve different outcomes, the same outcomes in different settings with different kids. So in effect, I mean, it's a successful schools model is kind of like a cost function, but without all of the other variables that need to be in there to figure out what's the cost to get to this standard in New York City, in different parts of the city with different kids in Yonkers, Syracuse, or in Westchester and Long Island. Yeah, we are going to develop what is kind of a much richer model than that, with at least 5 years of data. When it comes to that will involve, we're going to do this at a couple different levels. One is to use school level data on expenditures for all schools across the whole state over a 5-year period from around 2019 to 2023, where we have school level expenditures. We have a bunch of different school level measures of the student population characteristics, shares of kids with specific disabilities, shares of kids from families that qualify for subsidized lunch, shares of English language learners, migrant students, homeless, and children from foster care. We have all the batches of data that are collected on student populations at the school level that are available, consistently collected over a number of years through the state ed department, through NICED, and they're embedded within the state report cards database files, right? We have to rely on expenditure measures and student population measures and student outcome measures that are the same measures collected across all schools and districts across the state and over enough years, so that we can have a stable model for projecting out what the additional spending would need to be under different circumstances. So it's expenditure data, student demographic data, the location characteristic, the percentages of kids in different grade ranges affects the expenditure associated with the outcomes. The small size and geographic remoteness affects costs significantly. That's not a New York City issue as much as it might be an issue up in the spaces between Plattsburgh and Canton, and regional variations in costs. And yeah, I see the note about the school lunch data. We have ways to try to impute and or correct to get more detailed specifics. We can census poverty data are obviously only available based on place of residence and really only reliable at the district level, although we can break New York City into counties and or geographic districts aligned with zip codes. So these are some of the ideas that we're playing around with and how to get a sufficiently precise model using the best possible measures. And that's one of our first steps, is to figure out, well, which of these, for example, to evaluate the sufficiency of free lunch data versus census poverty data. There may be messiness in the subsidized lunch data, but it still may be, not saying it is at all in this case, but it may be the stronger predictor of outcome variation, and hence the stronger predictor of the costs of mitigating the outcome variation, right? So in that first step, student needs analysis, we vet the alternative measures of data, ranging from those which are reported, again, through SED and the SRCs, to a variety of kind of economic conditions and stuff that we might pull from census data at county or smaller microspace levels. So we vet a number of measures for the models, going back to that diagram that go from the spending measures to the student measures to the district characteristics and school characteristics to the geographic conditions in which they operate. So yeah, it'd be nice to get some more precision on some measures about the student characteristics that may or may not. Like one of the things we found, for example, is that foster care may have a strong effect on cost, but it has a small effect on the overall formula because it remains a relatively small subset of the population. May still be significant enough for inclusion in the model. It ended up in one of our higher ed models in the final version. But those are the reason why we have a stepwise approach that starts with vetting the needs data and then doing some of the kind of background spending analysis. Is we don't want to just automatically assume that the measures that have been used to drive the formula in the past are the measures that we should still use. Certainly not really the case with those that are embedded in the Pupil Needs Index in New York. Just trying to respond to comments that were flying by in the feed as I was answering the question. So I'm not sure how coherent that was, but New York's pretty good on data. which is kind of nice. Not every state is as easy to work with in terms of the data.
No, that was great, Bruce. And as you can see, this is a very interested and lively group. And so thank you for not only responding to the questions, but also engaging the secondary questions that were emerging in the chat. There are a couple other questions too that I think go back towards you, Michael. Things that are more questions that more so surround some of the I guess more of the context of the emerging project. One is the NYC DOE supporting your project? Are there other groups supporting the project as well? And then another question that I want to throw on top of these are, what do you mean by a quote unquote constitutional new formula?
Okay. Well, what I think I can say about the New York DOE and a number of other groups is they've been very encouraging, very cooperative. They agree with us that there needs to be a new formula. I don't want to say that the New York DOE or any of the other statewide groups, New York City groups that have encouraged us to move ahead with this are supporting any particular positions. We haven't come out with any positions. We will come out with positions. We're going to have a position on next year's budget. We're going to have a position on how we should move forward to fully develop the formula after we get the statistical analysis, all that data from AIR. And we want to work with the New York DOE. We want to work with the School Boards Association, the Teachers Union, just a host. I know there are 100 groups in New York City that have gone on record as saying we need a new formula. And we take that as encouragement that we're moving this process forward because the state agencies, the legislature working with the governor, were unable to do it. SED wanted to do it. They got stalled. We want to do it. We want it to move forward. So we've gotten a lot of encouragement. Whether that means they're not supporting everything we're doing, we hope everybody watching is going to keep in tune with us, keep in dialogue with us, and we can come up with positions that many, if not all of you, can support. And let me say, when we developed the foundation aid formula as part of the culmination of the CFE case, it was the same kind of process. We tried to reach out to groups throughout the state. We tried to work with them, and we did have an incredible consensus. That foundation aid formula in 2007 was approved 80-2 in the state Senate, which was very split among the parties at that time. That's because all the work that had gone into it ironed out a lot of the difficulties. Everybody agreed it was a great formula. That's what we're looking for now. And we're hopeful that we will reach that stage. Now, when we use the term constitutional formula, Jonathan, you spelled out at the beginning of the discussion the requirements that the Constitution makes for how you construct a formula. It's got to be based on a systematic analysis of needs. It's then got to be those needs. That's what AIR is doing. We want to add to AIR's statistical work, input through professional judgment, through public engagement, through input, through a variety of ways to add the qualitative dimensions to this. And when all of that is done, we hope the state will be working on putting together the new formula, the new equitable formula. If there's no option, if people are still supporting us, we'll go on and do it. But it's really the state's job. I want to emphasize that again. In any event, it should be done in the way the Constitution requires, based on student need, based on systemic analysis. And the reason we originally called for an independent commission is it should be, look, there's going to be a political context for this, but it should be based as much as possible on systemic analysis, statistical analysis, public knowledge, transparency, and public input. And if we can get a process like that going, that will be sufficiently independent that we can get the kind of consensus and support we had when the last formula was young and vibrant and meeting the job. It no longer is.
It's a great answer. I think we have time for at least a couple more, see if we can squeeze some in. One question is, will there be benefits to the students of the new formula you plan to develop? And then another question about students. What are the student outcomes that you're evaluating? This is for AIR. What are the student outcomes that you're evaluating and how are they measured / quantified?
We will be vetting a number of measures, again, looking for the ones that capture the variation, in particular the variation associated with student needs. But again, some of the data requirements here are that we have measures that are uniformly collected across all years and all schools and districts. So that means we are going to be relying on SED available measures, but not leaning entirely on test scores, a mix of test scores, whatever kind of works in modeling in the construction of this aggregate outcome index that we develop, that will look at combinations of test scores, graduation rates, dropout rates, whether or not there's some role for advanced Regent diploma shares in there. It will be a combination of these standardly available outcome measures collected over all years by the state ed department.
By the way,
yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to intersect a couple of points on that. I mean, we are actually in the process of discussing with AIR exactly what outcome measures they should be looking at. We're taking into account the regents have put out goals for next year, for the next 5 years, for the long run. So it's not just what current test rates are and all. The regents are projecting what progress should be over the number of years that this new formula would be covering. So all that's going to be taken into account. But I also want to use this opportunity in answering this question to say what I mean by qualitative dimensions. Now, as Bruce was indicating, AIR is going to get as broad an analysis through statistical data that's available, not only for test scores, but graduation rates, dropout rates, all kinds of other things. But there are some things that they can't capture. For instance, we at the center happen to be very interested in civic education now. How do we make sure that there's sufficient funds for the kind of quality civic education that we're pushing for, that other people are pushing for? Statistically, it's hard to capture that. That's why we need this second round, where we'll have people who are working with that, people who are interested in civic education, interested in other qualitative education measures, making sure that the formula, as it's finally coming out, is going to have sufficient resources to meet those needs well beyond test scores. That kids, yes, they should be academically as proficient as possible, but they should be prepared to be capable citizens. They should lead fulfilling lives. They should have their mental health needs met. So that's why we need the full formula, and that's why it's a two-phase process.
And to go back to where Michael started on that too, that was jumping off where I was, is that on the one hand, there's identifying the measures that go into the outcome index. And then the second piece is setting the targets. What is the level of outcome we want all children to have equal opportunity to achieve? And I see a lot going by in the comments about different poverty measures and stuff. And we have a variety of things, variety of types of measures from different sources that are available down to the geographic spaces and school level, which may or may not relate to the actual school enrollments. But for example, one of the really cool ones is the Neighborhood Poverty Index from the National Center for Education Statistics Edge System. It's a school level index and it's a continuous measure around 100 as a poverty. So it's like an income to poverty ratio that's available at school level for every school in the country. It becomes very useful in our models, but it's about the populations in the geographic spaces surrounding individual schools, which may or may not, in high kind of rates of choice environments like New York City, may or may not represent school enrollments. So, a lot of things to play with to figure out what might work best in the model. Basic constraints being that they got to be consistently available across all schools in the state and for all years, for which we need to include, we can impute, they're going to be missing outcome data for 2020, but we can do some imputation to cover gaps where needed.
Well, before we close out, are there, obviously, like this is a very, this is on the one hand, an open conversation, but this is also an intimate conversation. As we depart, are there any recommendations that you all have for how folks can get involved? What can folks look for moving forward? What are some things that any attendee who has been motivated, inspired by the conversation that's been happening about what's about to happen with ACE, how can they contribute to the cause? How can they get involved?
Well, I guess for the moment, the best advice I could give people, especially if you're new to this whole process, check out our website on the Center for Educational Equity. We have a section of the website that deals with this ACE project, the school funding project. We have a lot of information there. We have frequently answered questions. We're going to be feeding more and more information there as we go forward with this process, as we get more data from AIR. And we're going to set up additional sessions like this to try to give you an opportunity for ongoing conversations. Beyond that, we do expect in December to put out a position paper that will respond to what Rockefeller is going to come up with. And we'll probably be circulating drafts of that to various organizations that have indicated that they'd like to work with us. So we're in the process of figuring out how to do all of this. And when we've got a position, if it differs from what the governor is proposing, we will reach out and ask people to demonstrate if they agree with our position rather than other positions, to let their legislators know about it, to be heard. So we're going to try to get as much input from the public as possible, and we hope that'll lead to public support for the positions we're eventually going to take, which are going to be based first this round largely on the data we're getting from AIR. But as I say, as the process moves forward for developing the full formula, it's going to be a much more open, transparent, public-oriented process that we hope everybody who's interested will be able to contribute to.
And that is a great note on which to end an incredible presentation. Thank you all again for attending our ACE project informational event here. Be on the lookout for more communication from the Center for Educational Equity. Look out for an email with a link to the recording of this presentation in case you weren't able to catch the full thing, or you want to share it with interested parties within your network. Be on the lookout for more exciting information around this. More to come. This is just the beginning. Thank you for being here with us. It's been a pleasure.